I decided to make another video here. I'm celebrating my 35th birthday this weekend, and my birthday falls on a Tuesday this year, so I'm just gonna do two different celebrations for that, one this weekend and one next weekend. Nothing really any different than what I usually do during the week and on the weekend anyway, but yeah, just have some beer here. I've had well, not quite a few yet. I think I'm on my third one now, though. I'll probably have. I think I'm going to do like six on Friday and then six on Saturday, and that'll be what I'll do for the rest of my life until I turn 65. And then I'll do the what the experts recommend, the 7 beers per week. So 3.5 Friday, 3.5 Saturday. But anyway, I don't know. I just thought I should kind of talk about like how things have changed since I was a kid or a child rather. It's just weird reaching this 35 years. I'm not quite 35 yet. I'll be 35 on Tuesday, but yeah. So it's just I'm trying to think of what has changed since I was born. I mean, so much. NASA's done a lot, obviously, and that's sort of my big interest right now. DART and SLS and Artemis and creep, potassium and rare earth elements and phosphorus, um, and oxygen mining and metal mining on the moon and um, yeah, just solar sails and yeah, SpaceX has done a lot also. Elon Musk is a big phenomenon in my time recently. Um, he is a really prolific person. SpaceX originally was the founder of Zip2, which provided maps for cities. Neuralink, um, OpenAI, which is interesting. I don't really know what they're trying to do with Neuralink there. I don't know why they're trying to transmit thoughts onto um, apes, but I don't know what the little function is for that. Um, but yeah, just a lot more advancement in terms of space exploration, and there's more private companies besides NASA and SpaceX who are also um, going into space exploration now too. There is Firefly, which is have another organization which NASA is using their Blue Ghost program. Their drone, I'm not a drone, lunar lander is the term, but it is kind of like a drone or probe to collect information on the moon regarding what sort of elements can be used, water. SLS and Artemis is using, or plans on using, I think this is correct, hydrogen transformation using water on the moon to create hydrogen fuel. So that's really cool. Just so many technological innovations in the past 35 years, and it's like increasing exponentially. So Ray Kurzweil talks about Moore's Law and states that for every year our technology will increase in its capacity twofold. I don't know if that's quite the case. I don't think it's our technology is increasing doubly every year, but it is increasing faster and faster as there's more people on the planet. When I was born in '88, there was 5 million people on the planet. There are now 7.8 billion, and that is going to reach Earth's capacity at 9.5 billion. So we're getting there. We're getting close there. So I'm glad we are. Well, I'm not doing this. I'm not a part of NASA, although I do hope to be someday. Code Academy says you can be a coder for NASA, so that's what I'm pushing for here. I do have some coding experience in HTML, as well as R and SPSS and SAS. So that's from grad school, the R, SPSS, and SAS. But so that's sort of my goal right now. That'd be really cool if I could do that code for them. doing like software programming. I don't know what for. I'm guessing they're, I mean, obviously they're technology, but I don't know what technology I'd be coding for them, using what they usually use: C, C++, Java, Python. Those are the big ones. I think there's another one too, um, but yeah, that's sort of my goal. And what else has changed? So yeah, just so many technological improvements. When I was, I remember when I was three. I talked about this in another video, but having a television in the basement that was a cathode ray tube television. So many televisions now are smart TVs, but the evolution of the TVs that I've seen throughout my life, I did have a cathode ray tube television. I had a Betamax when I was really young. That sort of upgraded to a VHS later on, then to DVD and Blu-ray, and then digital TV and TiVo, where you can record shows and skip through the commercials. Internet obviously became more widespread in the 90s, although that did exist in, well, even way back in like the 60s with ARPANET. But in terms of the general public, more so in the 80s where sites were sort of just text-based, but the 90s is when I really saw that boom happen. Sort of the e-bubble burst also, where a lot of electronic um, sites sort of became oversaturated. But obviously, the internet's a huge phenomenon. The accessibility of the internet has become more widespread as I become older. My family first got internet or had internet when I was about 9. So I do remember using early internet. The sites were fairly primitive, but still, good. I didn't really use many of like the shopping sites and the weather and other news information sites, things like that. I was more focused on like Newgrounds. When I was a kid, I liked the animations that were on there. But I do obviously use the internet now more for educating myself, which is really awesome. Such a huge um, breakthrough and I do hope people use the internet more for just entertainment. I hope they use it to read and memorize and educate one's brain and improve one's gray matter. But I'm trying to think of what else here. Obviously, the internet, ARPANET in the 60s, and then text-based more in the 70s and 80s. Not very widespread, but then more widespread in the 90s. And obviously, I think I read a figure a while ago. I think like 70% of it's either American and maybe it's either American or all households in the world that have the internet now. I'll have to double check that, but I know the internet is obviously more widespread now, which is great. But I do remember having dial-up, which was slower back then, back in the 90s, and then moving to well, I think that was Roadrunner that which we had back then here in Rochester, and moving to Wi-Fi, which is awesome. Having Bluetooth technology is another big breakthrough that I've seen in my life. Um, Innovations for video games. I remember the old Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES, playing that and really liking that. And just wondering what it would be like to have games in 3D. Um, Seeing 16-bit on the Sega Genesis, the improved graphics, and then eventually 3D. The PlayStation, which was my first 3D system that I had, and the N64, GameCube, and Wii, and Wii U, and Nintendo Switch, and PS4, all the PlayStation games and Xboxes. It's just insane to see how much technological innovation has increased in the past 35 years that I've been on the planet. I mean, if I were to describe my weekend when I was 5, I'd probably be playing the Sega Genesis. I'd probably be playing the same type of games over and over. Now I have access to almost every game that's been created up till now. And obviously, you still have to pay for the new ones, which is good. Um, but it's just insane how many games I have access to now. the amount of media I have access to now, Netflix, um, and just the amount of information. It's just this rapid increase of information dissemination via these new technologies, the internet, video games, um, smartphones. I remember the old brick phone that I first got when I had my first cell phone. Um, in the 80s, there were obviously even larger phones than the smaller brick phones I had as a kid. And they did, those brick phones did have games on them too, Tetris, simpler games like that. But now I can just, with the click of a button, access the internet on this phone here, um, which is just amazing. I mean, it fits in the palm of my hand. It's just incredible how more people can create better things and more of them. Both quantity and quality has increased. Um, but yeah, it's just nuts because when you're I guess I'll show sort of the negative parts. If I were to compare, I mean, obviously I had a great time in the 90s as well as the 2000s and the 2010s. A bit of the 80s, although I don't really remember the 80s as I was like two to zero then. But yeah, 90s was great. Sega Genesis I remember really well, the 16-bit graphics. But for a middle class person like myself, ended up playing a lot of the games over and over, and those games were good and they're difficult, but there's just so much more variety now and so much more accessibility. And I guess that could be a fault too, because it is good to focus on one game for a bit. You don't want to jump around too much. So it is interesting when you see, if you think about it that way, we don't really think about everything improving, but sort of staying the same. But I do think things have improved. Just so much more information that I have access to, and the ability to learn more about the world and what's going on, what people are doing. Obviously, NASA, and Elon Musk, and SpaceX, and Neuralink, OpenAI, the Boring Company. Really like his flamethrower thrower. That's cool too. He's just such a prolific person, and I really respect him. It's such a cool job and jobs that he has. Such really smart move where I think he just invested in some really wise companies. Really built himself up as an investor of these organizations that are providing new technologies and building new technologies. Um, but yeah, so the 90s was great. Good cartoons then. The 90s was sort of the time period where I don't know why this is, but it is sort of the gross out decade in terms of like cartoons and media. Just a lot of like really gross media. There, Freaked was created in the 90s. You have Rocko's Modern Life. You have Ren and Stimpy. I guess these animators and filmmakers just started to become interested in the gross. As we, well, not as we, but I suppose as humans, I guess we became more interested in the strange and obscure and the gross and the sort of borderline sort of topics. You sort of have that Generation X mentality of, this sort of ennui where, technology is increasing. You have all this new stuff you can do. You have these video games and TV, and it's I was young then in the 90s, so I don't know what those people who were adults then were thinking of when they were creating all these weird sort of gross sort of media. Earthworm Jim and the neighborhood that Doug Snapple made had a lot of gross, weird stuff in there, but the sense of humor sort of shifted then in terms of what was considered funny and appropriate for what was funny and what to watch on the weekends to have a good time there. Um, but yeah, so moving into the 2000s, so yeah, CGI became huge in the 2000s. There was CGI before then, in the 90s and even the 80s too, but that's really when that started to become big. I do remember that. Seeing Spider-Man for this first time just made really good use of CGI. 128-bit graphics became big in the 2000s compared to the 16 and 64-bit in the 90s. So yeah, it's just insane in terms of the graphics that we now can see, in terms of the art that's made now. Um, in terms of cars, I sort of started driving in the 2000s too. So obviously the electric vehicles are interesting. We have concepts for flying cars now, even self-driving cars now. Just insane to think about that. There's maglev, which uses the magnetic system to support trains, and then those trains can travel on those magnetic rails, which is insane also. Um, Obviously, I don't think planes have changed much in terms of commercial planes. I don't think that's changed very much then. There have been changes in terms of like their technology they offer for their passengers, like the TVs that are in the chairs now. That's great. I don't think the actual design of like the planes in terms of flight has changed very much, although I could be wrong about that. But there are bigger planes now. Like the Boeing 747 is huge. And I did watch a documentary on a plane for the future, which shows holograms being used on the planes, which is really interesting for the passengers to use. But in the 90s, when I was on a plane, there really wasn't, for like an economy class or coach class option, you didn't really have the option of watching TV. I mean, you could bring a book on the plane and you could read on the plane. But now, like every plane you go on to in the 2000s, they started to offer the TVs that were in the seat in front of you, and you can watch movies on there now. So that's a big technological innovation. And obviously, there is a danger with technology. The more technology you have, there is a danger of becoming sort of absorbed into that and sucked into it. And depending on what type of things you're looking at, it may be good or bad. So hopefully, people are still getting into science and math and history, obviously art as well. But I think it's just so cool that that type of innovation has been happening too. When I made my trip to Australia, that was like a 24-hour flight. So having a TV was kind of nice because I could watch some documentaries on Australia and learn about, the outback and what kind of animals live there and things like that. Um, but yeah, just this explosion of electronic information from 88 until I'm at the 2000s now, so I'll say 2005. But yeah, I remember the GameCube. I talked about that a bit already. But just the increase of graphics in video games has improved. Video games have become more like films now. Ninja Gaiden did incorporate cutscenes in its game back in the 80s, although I didn't really play that much until recently. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, things aren't like super different. I mean, you still. I mean, when I was in the 90s, I still woke up, went to school, came home. It's still that sort of same system, but which is good, and it's a good system. But it seems a lot more, not necessarily freedom now, but there's more potential for innovation. There's more potential for someone who isn't part of a large organization to become a part of one, just via their home. I mean, YouTube, obviously, mid 2000s I'm at now, so I might as well talk about this technology, which I'm just starting to become involved with now. Another huge innovation where someone can actually just film themselves and speak about the things they like. They can educate other people on important topics, warn people about things that have happened to them. So another huge technological innovation that's happened since 1988. And again, I'm not super old, but I'd say I'm slightly to somewhat young. Um, so I'm trying to think of what else here. So yeah, Netflix is another huge one. That is a big innovation too, just having this access to movies and TV, and just the explosion of the amount of free TV and movies like Tubi and Pluto and all these other channels like Disney Plus that are available online now, and their connection to these smart TVs and Hisense. It's just insane in terms of what type of programming goes into these. And I know binary is based on whether or not a metal strip is magnetized or not. So one is on, which means it's magnetized, and then zero means it's off, which means it's demagnetized. So that's sort of the basis behind binary, but it's just insane to think about that extrapolation from, okay, I have this, I think of Pong when I try to think of how this evolved. So you have this really simple dot on the screen, you have that one magnetized bit of information that creates that ball that you can pass back and forth. And then you have to think of that program of, okay, now I want to create this bar. Now I have to have like 5 dots in this vertical line. So I have to create this language for this electronic information of magnetized or unmagnetized bits. And bits turns into bytes, and bytes to kilo and mega and gigabytes. We have qubit now, which is super fast. Um, Not necessarily. It's not non-binary, which some people might think of it as. It's not. I mean, it is quantum bits, but it's not. It's just super fast transition between on and off. It still has that binary element to it though, but that's still really cool. You have this new scientific discovery of the observation effect, where if one sees a particle, one realizes that the particle reacts differently when one observes it. So this idea that um, the electrons and fermions and bosons and all these different particles that make us and make up the world, when we observe these in different ways, they do react differently. And so that's a big scientific breakthrough. Also, this idea of quantum physics and string theory, these ideas of these vibrating strings in the universe is also a big breakthrough. Um, but yeah, it's just insane what has happened since 1988. So I'm trying to think of what else here. Yeah, so I'm at like the 2000s now. 2010s. It's harder as you get higher up in the years because the technology just becomes more specific. It becomes more advanced. Becomes harder to describe. But you have companies like NVIDIA creating these gaming laptops, which are incredibly fast in terms of their processing power. Um, they have the ability to deliver games on Steam, many of them of which you can just click and play within a matter of minutes. You can download a full 3D game within minutes, and that's something that I sort of dreamed about when I was a kid. I mean, I had the Game Boy Color, which is portable, and that's awesome, and I had that back in '98, and that was cool, but that was all 2D. And so when the 3DS, when the DS for Nintendo came out and had those 3D images or graphics rather on a portable device, that was such a huge leap, and I was so impressed by that as a kid to see that that came out in the 2000s, and then obviously the 2010s. There's a leap from the DS in the 2000s to the 3DS, which offered even more processing power and capability to present 3D graphics with even crisper looking 3D graphics. So that's really cool. It is interesting to see other technological innovations, not just in terms of automobiles with the driving cars and the flying cars, and with the new innovations on the planes that I mentioned, but also just in terms of like I have a used car that's from 2010, but that has XM radio that you can have in there, which is just satellite radio, which is an awesome innovation also. Has a lot more channels that they offer with just again more voices you can hear. different types of music and talk shows, and it's just really cool. More genres have emerged. I mean, you have sort of a mix of genres now where you have like the serial comic genre, which has sort of emerged, which is really prevalent in a lot of the Coen brothers films, who are really innovative also. Very prolific artists in the film industry. That genre has sort of emerged also, which I don't know, that might have existed back in the even before then now, but I'm trying to think of um, how these genres sort of differ now. I mean, you have anime now, which did exist in the 80s also. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, anime has changed in terms of, I mean, the quality of the art is still good. I mean, that it improves. The amount of anime that's being made has increased a lot also. And I mean, there are still good and bad things now, good and bad art, but I think even the so-called bad art can still be considered good if looked at in the right way. But yeah, it's just crazy how much information has developed since 1988. How much one can, well, not how much one can access, but how easily one can access this information. But anyway, that's sort of the my thoughts on what has changed. I mean, I don't really know what else to say for that, but that's just sort of my thoughts in terms of the 35 years that I've been here on Earth. And yeah, oh, marijuana legalization is another big thing, or cannabis legalization rather. Legal in New York now, as well as other states. So people are becoming more open to the legalization of drugs, which is good. As long as it's used safely and in moderation, that's always a good mentality to have. You have Uber now, which is also cool. DoorDash, you can just order food online now, and someone will deliver it to your door, which I have used. So that's cool too. Just so many things. But yeah, I think I'm going to end this video now, unless I can think of something else. But yeah, I mean, there are holograms that have been used on CNN in a way. Some people don't think of them as holograms. I don't know if that's the correct term. They might just be projections of images, which I thought that was a hologram, but I don't know. I mean, some people I've read don't agree with that distinction of stating what was used on CNN. I think it was during the election in 2008 where they started using those. But that's really cool that they are using that technology also. Um, I think that's about it. But yeah, so that's sort of what I've experienced from 1988 till present day in 2023. I'm just wondering what else is going to happen. I mean, there's been other innovations in agriculture also. Both control and vents and the Farmers Business Network, which allows farmers to find out what prices are actually fair on a network which one can access from their phone. Both control is used to control or to provide information on bovines. So in terms of like their health status, what their weight is, if they have any sicknesses or anything that need to be um, vaccinated or whatnot. That's another good innovation in terms of agriculture. You have Vents, which is a electric vent sort of program. You have Rexor and Jaguar, which are new technologies that make use of real-time kinematics in farming. Also, I think those are harvesters. But there's also an innovation in architecture. Max Showalta's Urban Shelf, which makes use of a city that has ramps essentially throughout the city that one can make use of to access different locations if you're handy capped or handy capable, whatever term you prefer there. Um, but yeah, I think that is that for I mean, that's what I know about architecture and agriculture. I'm trying to think of what other fields there have been innovations in. Obviously everywhere, but what do I know here? Let's see. I think that's that. Oh, obviously 3D printing is a big innovation too. That's huge. That's an incredible and very complex process that makes use of mirrors and lasers and resin. There's both top-down and bottom-up printing, 3D printing. So that is another huge innovation that I've seen as I've gotten older. Um, and I'm trying to think of what else here. Yeah, I think that's about it. I think that's all my brain can remember for now. Remember for now. Um, but yeah, just such a huge increase in the amount of information we can access. The easiness of the access has increased. Obviously, other innovations in agriculture and architecture and vehicles. Oh, military advancements, exoskeletons that have been developed to increase the strength of those that you are using them by 10. There's the bear technology, which is a machine that can assist someone who has been injured during war and can carry them off the battlefield. And I think can provide, I don't know if they can provide medical support, but I know it can carry them off the battlefield. And that's a huge innovation also. Um, there have been other innovations in terms of the weaponry in the military also, which I'm not so knowledgeable about, which I've read a bit of. Um, but that has increased also. Drones obviously are a huge innovation, not only for the military, but just for people who want to use drones to deliver food or just use them to on their own for fun. So that's huge also. Man, just so many things. It's just nuts. But yeah, yeah, just I'm a little bit buzzed right now, so pardon that. But just insane in terms of the technological innovations, and obviously technology does help us interact better socially. It gives us something to look forward to after you're working during the week. Motivates one to work more, motivates one to work harder. Um, Trying to think of what else here. Oh, there's been other innovations in food too. So they have the Hershey's Zero Sugar Chocolate, which has been something that I have talked about. It's not actually zero sugar, it's reduced sugar, but that's still a very good innovation. Um, Herm, I'm trying to think of what else here. There's been a movement in art, which, if you think about Banksy as sort of the big one in the 2000s, 2010s, this sort of guerrilla art becoming a style, which is cool. Um, and obviously, AI has become huge recently, relatively recently here. Chat GPT generated pre-trained responses, and there's also deep learning, which makes use of state action rewards and proximal parity optimization, which is essentially the compression of or reduction of error that one can see in their program. So an example of this that I have seen is with a Spider-Man video game, and they test their Spider-Man model and its swinging ability. And what they do is they essentially compress the errors and then reduce these errors via trial and error with this model. the Spider-Man model, which can swing through the city, and they are able to make Spidey's swinging more efficient via this programming of state action reward, PPO, proximal parity optimization. I'm not an expert on this, so I can't say too much more about it, but that's a really interesting process. If you're interested in that, deep learning and machine learning, AI in general. And I don't think we have to worry. If you're worried about AI turning on us, I don't think that's a big worry. There is a worry that the AI can malfunction, but I think we're smart enough to be um, very nitpicky. I think those who are going to make the AI are going to make them very safe. I don't think, I mean, obviously, AI is not organic, so it can't develop free will. It's going to do what it's programmed to do. That's what defines artificial intelligence. So there is a danger of it malfunctioning and potentially hurting us, but it's not like it's going to develop a free will and then rebel against humans. It's just it might function, it might shut down, but I don't think there's no worry about a Matrix scenario where all the machines turn against us and put us into pods. But the AI is huge now too. And looked into that a bit myself. But hmm, I'm trying to think of what else is. I think that's about it for now. I keep saying that, and then I keep thinking of other things that I've read into, and then but I think that's it. I really cannot think of much else. I'm trying to think of how comedy has changed, like how film has changed in terms of like comedic films as well as stand-up comedy. Um, it seems to be a bit more. I'm trying to think of how comedy has evolved since the 80s and what I have seen. Obviously, you have the observational comedy, which was big in the 90s, but then that sort of transitioned to sort of alternative comedy where people just start talking more about their lives, try to associate more with the audience. But then there's also other comedians who incorporate audience interaction, like Patton Oswalt has in his recent specials, who sort of poke fun at the audience in their interaction also. So that has evolved also. Just comedy in general. Tim Heidecker is huge in this field. He's probably the most innovative person I can think of within the field of comedy. He's just created so many different shows where he explores different topics, ranging anywhere from poking fun at Middle America, poking fun at faults in our products that we create. Um, I'm trying to think of what else here that he sort of poked fun at and critiqued in his comedy. Um, some of it's just sort of zany and fun and silly, which is also good, just sort of goofing around, which is also cool. Um, but he has a nice balance of that. He's very good at critiquing things and providing helpful criticism and humorous criticism also that's a bit um, I don't want to say hidden, but sort of veiled. Um, but that is interesting also. He's very innovative, very prolific also. Is still doing really good work with office hours, and I'm glad he still discusses politics um, on his show too and what's going on in that realm. Um, but I think politics is interesting because there's been a lot of change in that too. Obviously, as our technology changes, our politics are going to change also. But yeah, I think I am going to end this soon. Oh, I'm trying to think about a lot of different beers now also. So I'll end with beer since I'm drinking beer. A lot more craft beers. I mean, a ton of craft beers now, which is really cool. I don't think quite as much as when I was younger, even in my 20s when I first started drinking. I was actually 19, but even since then, there's just been this explosion of craft beers and the amount of craft beers, the different flavors to them, which has been awesome. And yeah, I guess I'll end with that. So obviously, not the most important innovation, but an important one. So thanks for listening. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.